You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Unfortunately, if you're watching on YouTube, video issues persist for me. Hopefully, I will get that all squared away by the shows next week. But on today's episode, a Mets loss. Jose Quintana returned. He looked pretty good, but Drew Smith did not, and the Mets lineup failed to put up more than only 2 runs, dropping opportunity to potentially get a series sweep. I will discuss that game and how Quintana looked in the first segment. Second segment, injuries to discuss. Starling Marte hits the IL, and Tommy Pham exited the game early. Appears like Vientos could be on his way back to the Mets, so I'll go through how the roster would shake out with him. Then in the final segment, Mets vs. Red Sox series preview. Before we get to any of it, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, let's begin before we get into all the bad injury news, just talking about the one positive from this game. Jose Quintana looked good, and doesn't mean that he is just flat out going to be a dominant starter that changes the course of the season for the Mets. But what he looks to be is a very solid middle of the rotation starter. I mean, what we watched was Quintana, I don't know quite from at his peak last year, but certainly the type of pitcher that could have a lot of success. What's surprising to me when you watch Jose Quintana pitch is the velocity doesn't match the way the batters are reacting to the 89 to 92 they're getting on the fastball or the sinker. He yells after every throw. I love the full windup. And he was attacking for a lot of this game, and he keeps the ball down. And obviously the idea with that is to keep the ball in the yard. And he did that in this game. He did give up 3 hits in that first inning, but 2 of them were complete bloop shots. And really, that run I look at, and I don't think he could have done anything about it. But what he did in that spot after getting the first down and then giving up 3 consecutive hits is he had a lot of traffic on the bases. And he was able to get out of that jam without making it worse, and got a big strikeout of Yasmani Grandal to strand some runners there. So that was really encouraging to see the way he was able to pitch around some stuff, and then gave up a leadoff double in the second that came around to score on a sacrifice fly. Other than that, I mean, he was really solid. Got a inning double play ball in the third. Just was pitching to contact, getting outs, and I feel after watching Quintana pitch here that this is going to slide Carlos Carrasco into the 5th spot in the rotation. I know ultimately 1 through 5 really doesn't matter who's slotted where, but it does when you look at the context of the strength of your rotation, right? And Scherzer and Verlander are still those wild cards that could vault you to a different level if they're both on for the rest of the season. And last start, I should say, for each of them was strong. Kodai Senga has been the dependable force that you were hoping for, and he's been all year just a guy that you could count on, a guy who earned his all-star distinction. If he's your 3 and that is your 1, 2, 3, I think you feel pretty good. 4, if it's now Quintana and Cookie's your 5, the Mets have a good rotation right now. And yes, they could, if they decided to, sell at the deadline. I loved Andy Martino talking to scouts today, and immediately after Quintana's pulled, it felt like 5 minutes after, he's saying that Quintana could be traded. And that could be true. That also could be feeding into SNY's probably need right now to try to make the trade deadline a big story, as it obviously is, and I'm not saying I'm not guilty of that as well, but I also think that this is a Mets team that, as long as they don't fall completely flat on their face, and that's very much in the cards. We've watched them play baseball a year. I just see them ultimately holding. And they mentioned this on the broadcast today, to have Quintana and Narvaez be the two big performers of the game. Narvaez got the 2 hits on Michael Kopech, who didn't look great, honestly, but overpowered the Mets. And he hit a home run. And just the notion that those 2 guys were supposed to play big roles in the Mets this season and they didn't, I still am of the belief that the Mets front office, and ownership of course, is going to look at this team and say, well, we spent all this money on them. We got a good rotation now. We got good players in our starting lineup. Let's add an arm to this bullpen and just go for it and see if we can make a run. I really feel like that's where we're ultimately going. And I thought the one move that I was expecting to be made was a trade of a left fielder. And all of a sudden that seems to be off the table because now they are short 2 outfielders and probably need to keep Marcana. And you can say, well, who cares? If Marcana can net you some prospects, trade him. And I understand that idea. I do. But I would just tell you that I would not underestimate the Mets' desire to stay relevant. And I just don't think they're going to scrap what they have for spare parts. Now, let's just say you go this weekend into Boston, you get swept. You play a bad Yankees team and you lose those games as well. Well, now it's a different conversation. But if the Mets are, I would almost say within 8. Isn't that crazy to say? But if they're somewhat close, I just don't know. And I will say, not that I think they're going to make a run, but can they, play games in September where you're looking at the schedule in the wild card, like, oh, if this and this happens, maybe the Mets can get in it. I could see that being a scenario that unfolds, and it starts with starting pitching. And if you roll out a 5-man rotation that you like, okay. And I actually think for the first time this year, now that you add Quintana in this mix, I think you have a 5-man rotation where you really can't quibble with any of them. I also think it would be ridiculous for the Mets to trade Jose Quintana, and I don't believe that's going to happen. As far as Martino's report there, I just can't foresee it. I can't, especially because this isn't a team that's folding shop for 2024. And 2024 at $13 million, Jose Quintana is a piece the Mets probably want to have. And it's going to be this rotation that you're looking at right now, minus Carrasco, add in somebody else, but I don't think that that's something that they're going to really entertain. But who knows? Again, maybe they completely are terrible, and that is the ultimate motivation at the deadline. Just trade everything you can. And if they do, I'll be very interested to see the return they get back. Now, couple other quick notes from this game. Pete Alonso made a brutal error, but he got an RBI hit late that hopefully just eases his mental burden. It wasn't like it was a great hit. Actually, there was one moment where Eloy Jimenez just went opposite field. He just saw a gap between the second baseman, first baseman, peppered that hole, just a soft hit, but it drove in a run. And I remember thinking when he did that, man, Pete just needs to do that. And it's even if it's with no one on base, just get some hits, get some confidence going. So it was good to see him do basically that to drive in Brandon Nimmo late in that game for the only second run the Mets scored. But he made a really bad error that kind of let Drew Smith off the hook, because you look at Drew Smith's stats in this game, 4 runs allowed, only 1 of them earned. He pitched a lot worse than that. And honestly, he's getting to the point where I'd wonder when they're going to think about optioning him, because he hasn't been pitching consistently, and when you throw him out there, it hasn't looked good. Maybe he needs to go to Syracuse and just get some run and try to find his stuff again. He's too talented to give up on, but man, this season it has not looked good. Other couple notes, Dominic Leone and Trevor Gott, good innings for them at the end of the game, but in a lopsided affair at that point. And David Peterson bailed Smith out of his jam. and got an inning after that, couple strikeouts. He has really nasty stuff. Not sure if bullpen is a long-term home for him. I really don't think it is. But for this season, with the way these guys have pitched, he's got better stuff than a lot of guys are throwing out of that bullpen. So I do like David Peterson getting some opportunities. And I would have, in retrospect, kind of wish they went right to him. If a starter leaves after 5 and you're losing in a 2-1 game, maybe you get 2 innings out of David Peterson in a spot like that. But they went to Smith, and ultimately it sort of cost them the game, although you can't even say that when the Mets only mustered 2 runs. Part of that was not having one of your best bats in the lineup, Tommy Pham, who did scorch one today, and he got hurt running to first base trying to beat out a double play on a ball that never should have even been fielded by Tim Anderson. Just a rocket. Great play by him. Is he going to be out for some time? And Starling Marte hits the IL. We're going to go through the Mets' injured outfielders in just a minute. Before we do, though, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right price, and the right fit on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The New York Mets are playing the Boston Red Sox 7:10 Eastern Time tonight. Catch every pitch in the Mets' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. Mark Vientos on his way back to the Mets. It's now been reported. You can go on Twitter to follow Mike Mayer at MikeMayer22, who runs Metsmerize. He says that Vientos is getting called up to replace Starling Marte on the roster. All right. So that answers one question. The other one is Tommy Pham. Tommy Pham has been dealing with a groin injury. He's been playing through it a little bit on that play I was referring to. He hit a hard ground ball to short. Just kind of tried to leg it out, and immediately it stiffened up on him. He ran back out to play his position, but they brought him in, and Louis Guillorme came into second, and Mark Canha moved to left, and Jeff McNeil moved to right. And now you got to wonder, moving forward, what's the lineup? How are the Mets going to put these pieces together? And is Mark Vientos actually going to get a shot? Now, he hasn't been tearing the cover out the ball. This isn't a promotion where the guy's red hot in AAA. That was DJ Stewart, actually, when they got him up. In July, he's hitting 264, 316 on base, 472 slug. He does have 6 doubles in the month, 1 triple, 1 home run. June in Syracuse, his numbers were decent, but it was only 9 games. It's been a really rough year for Mark Vientos in the sense that he earned his promotion by being amazing in Syracuse early in the season. It was just great. He comes up, hits that big home run, and you think he's arrived. And then they put him on ice. And say what you want about the opportunities he got, because he was not good. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Mark Vientos was earning his stripes, because he certainly was not doing that. But I just felt as if he was not given the proper chance to succeed. He was not giving the playing time that a young hitter needs to get his feet wet. And now I'm wondering, what is this? Is this just, all right, we're getting pretty pretty left-handed on this team. You're losing Starling Marte, another right-handed bat. Who's the best right-handed bat we can call that can face left-handed pitching? Oh, it's Mark Vientos. And is he right back in that role? Because if he is, I don't know if he's going to succeed in it. And then if Tommy Pham needs to hit the IL, what do? They're playing in Syracuse, and they're still playing Danny Mendick and Ronnie Mauricio, who was given the start at shortstop in the game today. Where are they going to go? And you can make the case that if you actually are going to lose Pham for at least 10 days even, Now would be the time to call up Ryan Mauricio and just say, F it, let's see what he can do. Throw him out in left field, put Mark Canha in right, play him at second base, even, and put Jeff McNeil in right and Canha in left. Whatever it is, take the growing pains defensively of Ryan Mauricio and get his bat in the lineup and see. But I can see the Mets not doing that and saying, okay, well, we got DJ Stewart. He can play the outfield. So you still have Stewart, Canha, and Nimmo that can play the outfield. McNeil obviously can play the outfield. If you had to put Beatty back out there in a pinch, you could. But why are you going to do that when he's your everyday third baseman? So I guess that would be sort of the deal. It's just, hey, we're going to be super thin in the outfield. Daniel Vogelbach continues to be a sore thumb of this roster where he doesn't look good in any of his at-bats, and he doesn't fit this roster at all. But you're also just short bodies at this point if Pham does hit the IL. The hope is that Pham doesn't, that he can rest it for a couple days and be back because, man, you need him. You need Tommy Pham right now. But I don't know. So I would just hope they'd lean offense here. And this is an opportunity where, look, here are guys who should play every day. Let me run through the roster. Pete Alonso, you got to let him play through it. Brett Beatty, Francisco Lindor, Jeff McNeil. And McNeil's obviously a rover playing all over the place at this point. Mark Canha needs to be in there. Honestly, if you're sending Pham and Marte out, he needs to be in there every day. Nimmo every day. All right, so where are there left to play? Alvarez as well. It's DH. And it's figuring out who that third outfielder is. And sometimes it'll be Gourmet at second and McNeil in the outfield. Sometimes it might be DJ Stewart in the outfield if they're going with this current team. To me, that just leaves a wide open opportunity to start Mark Vientos every day at DH and see what you got. And look, if this ends up being a season where you're rebuilding anyway, or not rebuilding, but retooling for 2024, you're going to make some trades. You're just, quickening that process, 10 days early, whatever it is. Looking at other guys, that they could call on, I don't know. I really don't know what outfielder you like here. The only other player that I would say call back up is Danny Mendick for his positional versatility. So maybe that's the move here. Maybe it's call up Mendick with Vientos because he can play all over. And hopefully you don't play Mendick too much is what I would say. But for a team that was hanging on by a thread, to lose a guy in Tommy Pham who's been your best hitter, not on this season. On the season, maybe you make an argument for Lindor, or you'd make an argument for Nimmo or Alvarez. And Alvarez has certainly been really hot this month, but just since June, over the last couple of months, Tommy Pham has been your best hitter. So if he is out now, I don't like the Mets' chances to have a good next, whatever it is now, 9 games before the deadline. But maybe you can find a way with some favorable pitching matchups to beat the Red Sox this weekend. That's what I'll discuss next, a series preview of what lies ahead. Before we get to that, though, another word from our sponsors. The New York Mets play the Boston Red Sox 7:10 Eastern Time tonight. Catch every pitch in the Mets' hometown broadcast with Sirius XM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. Kodai Senga will take the hill Friday night going up against Cutter Crawford. Crawford been a mix of a starter and a reliever throughout this season. Overall numbers pretty solid, 3.74 ERA, 1.13 WHIP. A guy that really is just finally getting his footing at the big league level. Last couple of years, we've seen him a little bit, or they've seen him a little bit. 2021, he made 1 appearance, 1 start, gave up 5 runs in 2 innings. Last year, he pitched 77 1/3 for the Red Sox, 12 starts, 21 games, 5.47 ERA. And then this year, like I said, starting to come around a little bit for them. A pitcher that I'm sure they're hoping can solidify what's been a shaky rotation. But here you go. He's going to face this Mets team, and you look at his last 7 games, they've all been starts, and he's pitched to a 4.01 ERA. So not necessarily a fantastic pitcher going up against, but a guy who's throwing the ball pretty well. But you got Senga on the hill, so you hope that with Senga, the Mets are able to get this series off to a good start. I wonder what exactly the lineup's going to look like in that game and in the games throughout the series. I do know a game that Mark Vientos will start at DH, and that's game 2 because James Paxton's on the mound. So you got a lefty going up against Max Scherzer. That game now, I mean, I'm trying to even comprehend what's left. Like, I imagine against Cutter Crawford, you probably get a DJ Stewart start in the outfield with Daniel Vogelbach at DH. That's just my guess based on how Buck Showalter likes to manage this team. But if you see Mark Vientos in the starting lineup against Cutter Crawford, I would say, okay, maybe there's a directive to play him and let him sink or swim a little bit. I hold my breath on that one. The right-handed lineup, Vientos at DH, still Stewart in the outfield? I don't know. That's where I could see Danny Mendick being the other guy called up, and now Danny Mendick is starting against lefties at second base, and Jeff McNeil's in the outfield because you can't start Guillorme against lefty. I guess that's the one thing that they could do to avoid Daniel Vogelbach, right? Would be to put McNeil in right, Canna in left, and have Stewart DH, and Guillorme start at second, which, if I had to guess, that probably is a game Guillorme starts. Ultimately, there's still enough. Even with these lack of quality options, there is still enough to win this series because you still have Senga and Scherzer starting. You hope that late RBI hit maybe knocks a little bit of the rust off of Pete. We'll see. But you still got Lindor and Nimmo and Alvarez who are swinging pretty good bats. I at least like it when they're in the box right now. I'm not like, oh, this is an out. I think Canada getting more time, it's obviously not going to be better than Tommy Pham. But Canada line up more than Starling Marte is a net gain. So it's just a matter of who's that other guy in the lineup. I hope, again, that Vientos gets some run here just because the upside's there. And I think about a big right-handed bat going into Fenway, and I'd say, why not play him? Why not play him? Why not see if he can spray some balls off the monster and get himself into a little bit of a groove? But this is a series against the Red Sox where I'd certainly like to see the Mets take the first 2 because Carlos Carrasco pitching at Fenway, I think my chest is starting to tighten a little bit just thinking about it. Not to say he can't have a good outing. He had a good outing just a couple starts ago. But that's a small ballpark for a guy that can at times give up a lot of contact. So I don't necessarily feel great about the Mets winning a rubber match if this series were to get to that point. But look, as much as I felt like the Mets really should have swept that series with the White Sox, considering the state of that ball club, I'm not going to get mad at them for winning series. So I'll say going into this weekend, win another series. Win another series. Maybe you can really add to Yankee fan torment next week and do something special at Yankee Stadium. But I really think that and again, this is just to kind of land the point here about where I think this team goes at the deadline, is that's still at the forefront of everyone's mind. I think if they are able to pull off a series victory against the Red Sox this weekend, and they split those games against the Yankees, then they have a 4-gamer against the Nationals where they could do damage. And I guess the Nationals could end the Mets season effectively if they embarrassed them. But let's just say they win the Red Sox series, they win the National series, and they split the series against the Yankees, while they still won't be that close in the race. And that would be, 6 more wins? And 3 more losses. You add that to your current record. That puts you at, 51-54 at the deadline? I just had the feeling that this is a team that's just going to sit on their hands, play this thing out. And you know what? There's still enough players on this baseball team that I like watching, and I like this new rotation that, hey, I'd rather see, now, long-term view, probably not the smartest move, but for my life and having to watch these games for the next couple months, I'd like to see this team maybe be a little bit fun. And we just look back and say, oh, if they didn't become the worst baseball team in the history of the planet in June, they would have made the playoffs. And I guess if you had to ask me my prediction on July 20th on where this season ends, I think that's it. I think they have an uninspiring trade deadline. I think they make you believe a couple of times but never quite get there. And you sit on the sidelines after a disappointing close to 500 season, whether it's a couple games under, a couple games over. Think what could have been. That's going to be all up for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I really do think that I'm going to do some MLB draft coverage for the weekend for you guys. But I do have to figure out this internet issue I'm having. So right now, as I hit stop the record button, Xfinity is the first call for me. Regardless, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, Locked On Mets.